Today, I'm breaking down more sweet cards from Secrets of Strixhaven's preview season with a special eye towards what's going to be good at the pre-release so you don't miss any great cards in your pool. First up, we have Additive Evolution. It's 3 green for an uncommon enchantment. It says, when this enchantment enters, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains Vigilance until end of turn. So just by itself, this is giving you a 4/4 creature that the next turn will be a 5/5 attacking with Vigilance if you just keep stacking the counters onto it. But the real power of this card comes from the flexibility to put the counters wherever they need to be in order to maximize your attacks. If you have a flyer, maybe you want to give your flyer the extra counter so that it can attack through for more damage. If you have a certain breakpoint of power toughness, let's say your opponent has a 3/4 creature in play, all of a sudden you can turn your 3/3s into 4/4s and then all of a sudden attack past their creature or dominate it in combat. This flexibility and lasting advantage all attached to an enchantment is really, really nice, because a lot of the time enchantments are going to be hard for your opponents to deal with. And this card is going to be a really nice tool to win board stalls, which is exactly what you're looking for in Sealed, especially when you're playing mid-range or even slower decks like green-blue might want to be or green-black might want to be. While this card does mention fractals, so blue-green is an obvious home, always remember that there are multiple places you can play your cards. Next up is Garrison Excavator. It's 3 in a red for a 3/4 Orc Sorcerer with Menace. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 red and white spirit creature token. Now, the theme of the red-white archetype in this format is having cards leave your graveyard. There are flashback cards. There are cards that can return themselves from your graveyard to your hand or whatever. And so there's plenty of ways to trigger this card. And if you can, if you make sure you have built your deck in a certain way, or you're including the cards or flashing back your spells until your Garrison Excavator is in play, you can kind of make a 1-card army. And these things are always really nice to have, especially in Sealed, where getting extra value from your cards and then kind of forcing your opponent to deal with it can be really powerful, or kind of having these engines set up where maybe you have your Garrison Excavator in play and then you just get 3 extra 2/2s from it over the course of the game, and your opponent just kind of in a little bit of problematic territory. Or maybe you have a recurring way to get things out of your graveyard and then you just are in a really good spot. So this sort of card does need some support, but especially if you're playing an archetype that has some support for it, this thing can definitely be a really nice addition to your team, which it's funny because sometimes they make 4-mana 3/4 creatures that are just a little bit lackluster. I don't know why that's a historic trend, but don't sleep on this one. This 3/4's got some juice. Next up is Summoned Dromedary. This is a 3 in a white for a 4/3 spirit camel with Vigilance. It has 1 in a white. Return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Activate only as a sorcery. This card is just really nice. A lot of removal spells in Magic are going to destroy a creature, and so if they destroy this thing via combat or just a kill spell, you can just bring it back, play it again. In the late game, this is just a huge problem, and Vigilance means that you can just send this thing in every combat. You don't really care what it trades for, because you can just spend the 6 mana, 2 to get it back to your hand, 4 mana to replay it. If you have any cards that care about things leaving the graveyard, this can be useful. If you have any ways to maybe draw cards and discard cards, you can discard this card into your graveyard and then return it to your hand so you can get some extra value that way. There's just a lot of ways to use Summoned Dromedary, and it's just a really irritating card to deal with in the late game, because unless you have very specific removal that taps it down permanently or exiles it, the Summoned Dromedary is just going to keep coming back over and over and over. And 4 power means it attacks past most things. And even if they do have a 5 toughness creature, your Dromedary can still be attacking in. They kind of have to block because it's got Vigilance. It's just going to be available on block, so they don't want to just take 4 for no reason. So then your smaller removal spells like deal 3s or things like that can also be used to help deal with your opponent's bigger creature. So Dromedary is just a really nice tool, works great in the deck that cares about bringing things back from the graveyard, but it's also just a really nice threat, especially if you want your deck to go long. If you don't really think you'll have the time to bring this thing back over and over, that's a different story, but in Sealed, you generally will have that time. So this is a card to look for at pre-releases. Next up is Practiced Scrollsmith. It's red-white hybrid, white for a 3/2 with First Strike. It's a dwarf cleric, and when this creature enters, exile target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard until the end of your next turn. You may cast that card. So for starters, nice 2-for-1 built into a 3-drop. This is going to be just the sort of card you're looking for if you are trying to play red-white. It's a color combination that in Sealed can sometimes struggle to go late, and in Draft, it's also the sort of deck that's often aimed towards aggression. In this format, it seems like it has more tools to go to the long game, which is definitely an interesting thing to wrap your head around and be like, okay, this deck kind of wants to go long. The first time Strixhaven was around, red-white had a similar theme that kind of made it want to go to the long game, but it didn't really work out because the cards just weren't juiced enough. In this set, there seems to be some really nice ones that can maybe help red-white be a grindy deck, which is just something to adapt to in your head. This card also triggers cards that care about things leaving your graveyard. So if you have that 3/4 out, for example, when you play this practice Scrollsmith, you can exile a card from the graveyard, get an extra 2/2 for your troubles, things like that. So it's got some nice synergy as well as just being a great 2-for-1. A 3/2 first striker for 3 is just no joke either. Like first strike is one of those mechanics that's like when it's working, it's really working. And so this can like absolutely dominate on offense or defense, because if your opponent doesn't have a big enough blocker, it can attack really well. And if your opponent like is just on the offensive, this can kind of hold back a lot of things at once, because all of a sudden your opponent kind of has to kill this, or it'll start eating like relatively sizable creatures in combat. Before I get to the rest of the cards, I do want to talk about the NicolaiBolas group coaching session that I'm running on April 12th. It's the Sunday, the week before pre-releases. I wanted to offer an extra tool to help folks get ready. You can find information on that link in the description down below. But we're going to be doing a lot of stuff where we talk about cards to get better in sealed, which college you should pick for your pre-release, things like cards to play around in sealed. We'll do a practice sealed build together, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. So you can find all the information on that linked in the description down below. It's going to be a lot of fun, and also a really good way to get ready for pre-releases, which are kind of fun, like really fun events. Okay, moving on to more cards. We have Divergent Equation. This card is really expensive to get a lot of value from it, but those are oftentimes the sorts of cards that get a lot better in sealed. So Divergent Equation is X blue for an instant, return up to X target instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then exile Divergent Equation. That's so you can't just like loop Divergent Equations over and over if you have 2 of them, which is probably good for design purposes, because that'd be a really demoralizing way to lose. Regardless, if you're playing sealed and you have time to use this for X equals 3, that's going to be absolutely devastating, because not only is it a draw 3, but it's a draw 3 of like really like oftentimes maybe your best cards, because you're going to be able to get back instants and sorceries that are like removal spells or card draw spells or things like that. You do want this in the right shell. You want to make sure you have a lot of instants and sorceries to get back. But even if you're casting this for X equals 2, getting back 2 powerful spells, that can also be good enough for sealed, just getting card advantage, getting good decisions. I don't think this card's going to be as good in draft, where it's a lot harder to have the time to cast this for X equals 3, which is when the card gets really quite strong. But this also seems like the sort of card that in sealed could be even a splash target. If you're playing a red-white deck, this can also be a way to get things out of your graveyard, trigger your other spells, and just be a way to get like good value if you're trying to build a more grindy version of that. If you're playing blue-green, this can maybe get back some good instants and sorceries. If you're playing like a kind of Sultai deck, like a blue-green splash black, there's lots of good things to get back. It just seems like the sort of card that in sealed is a lot better than in draft, so I wanted to highlight it because those sorts of things are important when you are trying to improve your win percentages, to make sure you identify the cards that aren't just generically good in limited, but are good in specifically the format that you're playing. Next up is Environmental Scientist. This card is messed up. It's 1 and a green for a 2/2. When this creature enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. This is just an exact card that we've seen before, but the previous versions of this card cost 3 mana for a 2/2, and so just getting this on a 2 mana 2/2 is absolutely like, it's game changing, honestly. That's just like such a whole mana discount is crazy. Just like the kind of the power creep I want to say on this sort of thing. This card is just fantastic. Like 2/2s that like, it's like a 2/2 that draws you a card, but also it like lets you facilitate splashes, which you often want to be trying to do. Environmental Scientist is just like an absolute messed up card. These are the sorts of 2-drops that you really want in sealed. They have a lot of relevance to how the rest of the game plays out, even though sometimes their stat line, like, you might not be pressuring your opponent as much. Getting down a 2 mana 2/2 that also fixes your mana, gets you any splashes you need, and just draws you a card because it draws you the land is just really, really strong, especially if you have some late game cards where you can really put that mana, so hitting your land drops even later in the game can stay relevant. This card's, wow, just really strong. Next up is Elemental Mascot, 1 blue-red for a 1/4 elemental bird with flying and vigilance. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's the Opus ability. If 5 or more mana was spent to cast that spell, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until the end of your next turn. So just getting a card that's got good defensive stats, a 1/4 with flying and vigilance, means it'll chip in for damage every turn, but also stop a lot of your opponent's attackers, kind of invalidate a lot of their smaller creatures. And the fact that your opponent doesn't really know if you're going to cast an instant or sorcery spell means that sometimes this can hold back like multiple 2/2 creatures. If you have like 3 mana up, for example, and you have an Elemental Mascot in play, if your opponent had like a couple of 2/2s in play, they could normally like attack in with both. You block your 1/4 on one of them, and then the other like one gets through for 2 damage. In this case, your opponent might not want to do that, because if you cast an instant, your creature all of a sudden gets the +1/+0, eats their guy. Also, just the fact that you can get a stream of card advantage from this. You cast an instant or sorcery that costs 5 or more mana. You get to exile the top card, get some card advantage out of your 3-drop creature. Cards that can kind of take over board stalls are really nice, especially in sealed, where you have more time to cast these expensive spells and more time to like because you have more time, you can also include a couple more of them in your deck. So this is a really nice little like payoff. And flying is also a good way to chip in some damage and pressure your opponent. Vigilance on a like creature with this sort of stat line is also really nice for being defensive while also doing some damage. And then the final card we're looking at today is Fractal Tender. It's 3 green blue for a 3/3. It's got Ward 2 and it has Increment. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana you spent to cast it is greater, if the amount of mana you spent is greater than this creature's power or toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And at the beginning of each end step, if you put a counter on this creature this turn, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's a 5-mana 3/3 base, but if you cast a spell that costs 4 or more mana, you get to put a counter on it, and you also are going to get a 3/3 at end step. So that's just a huge amount of stats. And then if you cast a 5-drop after that, you can get another counter on this and another 3/3, and you can just kind of create an army. And as we said, there's going to be more time to put expensive cards in your deck. There's also a couple of other cards. We already saw the very first card we looked at in this video. Puts +1/+1 counters onto your creatures. So comboing that with Fractal Tender is also a really strong thing to do. And just these cards that, if they don't die, can kind of like threaten to almost end the game or just snowball out of control. Sure, maybe your deck doesn't have infinite cards that cost more than 4 or 5 mana. Like getting this over and over and over isn't necessarily going to be feasible. But there are other ways to put counters on your creatures, and Fractal Tender is just one of those payoff engine pieces that kind of has to die, but is sometimes hard to kill because of Ward 2 and the fact that it grows. All of that combined to make Fractal Tender a really nice card. And of course, don't sleep on the fact that you can sometimes splash these cards. If you're playing like a black-green deck, you can splash a card like Fractal Tender. Look for these sort of engine pieces in your deck, especially if you're trying to build a deck that's trying to go to the long game, which a lot of sealed decks are going to try to do. That's going to do it for this video, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.